senior writer for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. On today's RealTime Fantasy Sports Show, I'm going to give you 5 hot plays for Week 11 of the fantasy football season. Yes, we are already in Week 11. Things are winding down in fantasy leagues. Hopefully, you're sitting in good shape, ready to make a long playoff run and win all of your fantasy leagues. But if not, hopefully you can get hot right now and make it into the playoffs, sneak in there, maybe get hot in the playoffs as well. You don't have to be the best team all year to win your playoffs. I think many of you know that. You just need to get hot at the right time. So if you're on the outside looking in right now, I still think there's some time unless you've dug yourself too deep of a hole, but I think there's some time to get it going still. So here are 5 hot plays for Week 11 of the fantasy season. My first hot play is Dallas Cowboys receiver Amari Cooper. I know some are down on Cooper, and for a good reason. He hasn't been as prolific since the injury to Dak Prescott, but he hasn't been terrible by any means. He had 5 catches for 67 yards his last time out. He has 5 or more receptions, 3 or 4 games. He's still getting the work and producing, and I think he'll do better this week when Andy Dalton's back in the lineup. Plus, he gets a bad Vikings secondary. They allow the 4th most fantasy points to receivers. I think Cooper's a solid play in this matchup. I would not hesitate to use him by any means. My next hot play is Raiders running back Josh Jacobs. Jacobs had a 2-touchdown game last week. He ran for 112 yards. He had a season-high 136 total yards in the game. He has 100-yard games, 2 of 3. He plays the Chiefs, a team he scored 2 touchdowns against in Week 5. They're 29th overall against the run. I think Jacobs is going to get a ton of work in this one and will produce well for fantasy teams. My next hot play is Lions running back DAndre Swift. So Swift finally found his way into the starting lineup. And guess what? He had one of his best games of the fantasy season. He had 25.9 fantasy points. He had 149 total yards and a touchdown. He just needed to work. He had season highs in receptions and receiving yards. It's very encouraging for his fantasy value to see him get that much work in the passing game. He has 12 plus fantasy points, 5 of 6 games, and this hasn't been as the featured back in the Lions offense. Now he's the clear featured back, moving ahead of Adrian Peterson. It looks like the Lions are finally going to roll with him, give him a lot of work the rest of the way. I think he's going to be a huge fantasy factor. He plays the Panthers this week. They really struggle against the run. They allow the 4th most fantasy points of running backs. Swift is a legit top 10 fantasy back in this matchup. My next hot play is Steelers quarterback Ben Roethlisberger. So Roethlisberger had his best game of the season last week. He threw 4 touchdown passes. He had more than 30 fantasy points. He has 2 straight games with 3+ touchdowns. He is 6th overall in fantasy quarterback score in his last 3 games. He gets to work with some of the best receivers in football. He plays the Jags this week. They allow the 3rd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, 30th overall against the pass. I think Roethlisberger is set up for another huge performance in this tasty matchup. My last hot play for Week 11 is tight end Austin Hooper of the Cleveland Browns. So Hooper had just a catch on 2 targets last week, but that was in poor conditions. It was really windy, cold, rainy in that Cleveland game against the Texans, and Hooper was in his first game back from his emergency appendectomy, but he still got the looks in that game, and he has 5 receptions each of his last 3 games before last week, so he's been playing very well before that matchup in poor conditions. The tight end position's been very hard to gauge this year. I think Hooper's a good play in this matchup against the Eagles, who allow the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends. Those are my 5 hot plays for Week 11 of the fantasy season. I hope you all have a lot of success in your games this week and come out on the winning side of things and get ready to make your playoff runs. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports. Have a great day.